This RealAg Radio episode podcast is brought to you by high-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. And welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. It is great to be with you here. Oh, hey, also a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We're going to, as we've been doing every Friday, I try to do it during the middle of the week too. Haven't been very good this week. But today we're doing it. We got a bonus segment for those of you that are listening to the podcast version of the show as well. We're going to have a product spotlight with Genesis. We got the CEO of Genesis Fertilizer, Jason Mann, will be with us here today. We've also got a RealAg Issues Panel like we do every Friday, and we're bringing back a fan favorite today, Stuart Person. He is with MNP, based out of Edmonton. Stuart's a great friend of the show. He's going to provide some perspective through his lens on some of the issues that happened this week, and we'll, of course, also be joined by Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture. Now, if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or, of course, you can always call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. And, of course, you can find Real Agriculture across the whole social media space. I don't care what platform you're talking about, TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook. We are out across all of them. And make sure you tune in to The Agronomist on Monday night, hosted by Lyndsey Smith. She's got a great one on cover crops on Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain at the Real Agriculture YouTube channel, or, of course, at realagriculture.com/live. I want to encourage you to check out realagriculture.com and the opinion column that I put up this week. I think it's spurring some thoughts from people. It's talking about Fortress North America and how at a time where Canada's really elbows up, at a time where there's kind of a new generation of anti-American sentiment building in Canada, we've got, the Canadian election is entirely based right now on who would be the better candidate to deal with President Trump. At the end of the day, Canada may have a more integrated, solidified, deeper economic and security relationship with the United States than we did prior to all of this. And essentially, that's the concept of Fortress North America. Don't have a lot of time to get into all of it, but I encourage you to check out that piece. You can find it at realagriculture.com. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to dig in here a little bit on some of the issues that happened this week. We got Liberation Day in the U.S. We got a federal election in Canada. And we've also got the question, should canola farmers be compensated for some of the trade disruption with China? We'll get to all that when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147. It's now time for a product spotlight with Vantage Ag. Talking right now to CEO Paul Sigovich. How can Vantage Ag's new sub-nano liquid fertilizer products help growers reduce their costs?
At Vantage Ag, we've spent the last few years proving that our sub-nano liquid technology can replace a significant portion of traditional granular fertilizer at a fraction of the cost. For example, a standard 140-10-20 actual blend for canola costs about $155 an acre. By switching to our sub-nano liquids, cost drops to $53 per acre. That's over $100 in savings per acre while delivering the nutrients exactly when the plant needs them. Simply mix our new fertilizers with your in-crop pesticide applications throughout the growing season. Our products are applied at very low rates, are compatible with nearly all pesticides, and now you have the added benefit of applying the specific nutrients your crop needs exactly when they need them. Vantage.ag, and they can always give us a call at 778-919-3370.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Let's dig into the biggest issues of the week. But first I want to tell you about FP Genetics. They bring new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca and join thousands of Canadian growers who trust FP Genetics to deliver innovative, reliable seed genetics season after season. Experience the next wave with FP Genetics at fpgenetics.ca. Okay, up first, Kelvin Heppner coming out of snowy Altona, Manitoba.
Yes, doing well here, Sean. We've had some snow here the last couple mornings, but it disappears by mid-late part of the day, and we start over again. But our 4-year-old has been excited lately. She gets new snow every morning. She's excited.
Will she be this excited in June when it's still happening?
I don't know. I think I think this weekend, the next couple of days here, it's supposed to warm up, and we're maybe going to get a little bit more spring-like temperatures and warming happening here.
Nice. Also joining us, of course, Lyndsey Smith out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how's the weather out that way?
Well, now it's beautiful. It's been a week, though. So certainly parts of Ontario only got power yesterday for small pockets after the ice storm last weekend. We had just a bizarre swing. Wednesday night, we had freezing rain and snow again. And then Thursday, it was like 15 degrees, which was our first warm day. But the wind was howling. It was like Lethbridge all over again. So yeah, it feels like this is like the winter to spring, back and forth, hot, cold, kind of whatever. So we're on our way, I think, towards the warmer weather. Just Mother Nature getting the fits and starts out, I think. So
how I've described it is, it's like you get ahead of yourself, where it's like, ooh, spring, and then it's like whack, back to February.
Yeah, it's like no, too soon. Yeah. So I will say, it has been, we have had some pretty wild swings, to very warm, very cold, ice, etc. I'm a little concerned about some of our fall seeded crops, and how they fare. Also, the geese are back, Kelvin's favorite, and they've been feasting on everything out there. So we'll see what it looks like in about 3 weeks from now. But yeah, it's going all right.
Well, in Lethbridge, our golf courses are opening up, and spring is in the air in the Banana Belt. Also joining us, longtime RealAg Radio favorite from the city of past champions, it is Stuart Person from MNP. Hey, Stuart, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing good. Okay, let me have it. Let roll. Just bring it. The Flames and Oilers games with last Saturday. Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, it was a great game. Great result. And you mentioned golf courses are opening up in your neck of the woods. That's just perfect timing for the Flames.
Wow. Okay, well,
Take yourself up,
Jeepers. That's the
I don't think we'll be golfing in Edmonton until probably July. Yeah.
Oh, that's what you're going with. Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's bold.
Well, last week Kelvin predicted the Blue Jays season was over, and I think they're
already
8-2 or 7-2 or something like that now. So
5-2. Yeah, they had a good week.
Bad about that take, Kelvin?
I think you overstated, but it's feeling good right now because they're so far.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was giving it to Jim Wiesmeyer from Pro Farmer that Blue Jays swept the Nationals.
Yeah, and I think that is the first time they ever have. I think it might.
Oh, it might be.
Maybe not.
Yeah, might be. Okay. I'm not sure what everybody did for Liberation Day on April 2nd. Maybe a barbecue. Maybe there was a parade. I'm not really sure. I was stuck to the TV. And I guess Kelvin, sum it up. Canada, I guess, gets a sort of an opportunity to breathe, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the liberating happened. I know some people are choosing to call it Tariff Day. Some called it Obliteration Day, I believe. that type of thing. But yeah, Canada and Mexico were spared the worst case scenario. So that was positive news for Canadian agriculture included when it comes to our export industries here in Canada, as our exports under the US that are USMCA compliant, that meet the requirements and the terms, country of origin part of that when it comes to exports to the U.S., those are still going to be exempt. At the same time, the existing tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, they are all in effect now. And so some major parts of the Canadian economy are still being hammered by tariffs. And so I think in many ways, this was the rest of the world catching up to the feeling that Canada and Mexico have had the last 2 months.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it. Yeah, welcome to our nightmare in our world, everybody else. Europe clearly in the pocket with the rest of Asia. UK treated differently than Europe. That was a bit of a difference that was identified. Some countries facing tariffs that don't have people. That was interesting. I wasn't prepared for that one. I kind of a little bit surprised that the stock market has reacted the way it has to the significance, because I don't know who's surprised that they did this, because this is kind of what they said they were going to do. I'm sort of bewildered by that. Sorry, Kelvin, I interrupted. Go ahead.
I think the market was calling the bluff here still. I think a lot of people still thought that this was a bluff and that they weren't actually going to go ahead with these huge numbers. And right now, I think a lot of people are confused, and the market is trying to figure out what the off-ramp is here, what the walk-back mechanism, and that's something that I think we can get into on the show here. Just the way they've done this with it not being these high tariff rates, especially some Southeast Asian countries, African countries, they're not based off of those countries' trade barriers on U.S. goods. They're based completely off of those countries' trade surplus with the U.S. And so other than buying more, they can't really do anything to improve that situation. And some of these countries are not in a position to buy more from the U.S., buy more expensive American-made goods. So I think the market right now is saying, hang on, how are we going to get ourselves out of this corner now?
Yeah, I think one of the off-ramps, Stuart...
Let others speak as well.
Yeah, Stuart, I think one of the off-ramps here is they work back to a flat 10% tariff, which gets it back to tariffs are a revenue tool, and it funds the extension of those tax cuts. That's I don't know how quickly they get there, but that's ultimately where I think they end up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, he did that with us, right? And I think it seems like he starts high and brings it back down, and then makes the other side feel like they won something, but really he's got some of what he wanted, right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't think any of these tariffs are good news for anybody, really. And I think we're still stuck with the ones that are in place here. I think the livestock sector breathed a huge sigh of relief yesterday. I was talking to some folks in that group, and so did the grain sector. Or I guess on the second, or what did we call it? Liberation Day. So yeah, I mean, I would say you're probably right. He's probably going to walk it back to that 10. I think the markets, your comment on the markets, I think the markets, the general private business community, everybody's just in a state of they don't know. And I think that's why some of our stats that came out this week are not great and whatnot. I think people are just don't know what to do.
Yeah. Lyndsey, I was sharing on RFD TV earlier this week. I've been in Bismarck, North Dakota, the back end of this week, and having breakfast in the hotel lobby every morning has been fairly interesting, because what I've heard is a whole bunch of telephone conversations, people having breakfast. They're either talking to distributors, suppliers, somebody about, how all of this impacts their pricing. And I've heard conversations like, hey, get it all to me now, or I've heard, can you get it from China to another country that has a lower tariff, that kind of arbitrage. And all of this is angst and uncertainty. And there's one thing the market does not like. It is uncertainty. And even the greatest of Trump supporters is having to deal with some of the uncertainty at this moment.
Mm-hmm. And all of that does. So uncertainty, having to move things through other countries, canceling orders, pre-ordering, all that, it adds inefficiency and it takes margin out of the market. It absolutely does, because anytime you're adding, whether it's travel time or adding logistics issues or unknowns, etc., you essentially, as we're seeing with all sorts of different indicators, you take margin out of the work. And for what? Like, this is a really great question, is what is the potential off-ramp? What does this look like going forward? You guys can call it, or y'all can call it Liberation Day. I feel like we've just been liberated from any sense of how economics work, is really what I think the U.S. has been liberated from. Because it just seems to be like we're ignoring the basic principles of commerce in all of this, or the administration is trying to, and it's not working in their favor.
Wiesmeyer made a point on AgriTalk today that I thought was a good one. They probably should have they should have got the tax cut extension passed before they did these tariffs. We're out of order potentially, which I thought was a good point. Kelvin, before we take a break, opportunity here for Canadian exporters, Vietnam, Japan, of course, China targeted. Let's take China out of that pool. South Korea, like opportunity for exporters?
Potentially, and some of this, it hinges on what the retaliation is. We've seen, of course, China come out earlier today with a 34% tariff on U.S. all U.S. goods, which of course will include soybeans, and has hit the soybean market hard today. But that pricing affects our pricing here in Canada as well. So we're also seeing price declines today. So yeah, there's potential some silver linings around the edges when it comes to Canada having this preferential access under USMCA into the U.S. market, and potentially not facing the retaliatory tariffs that U.S. goods are facing into some of these markets. But in so many cases, we're an integrated supply chain, whether we like to say it or not. And so our Canadian soybeans often probably aren't differentiated from those U.S. soybeans when they're headed over to the Asian market, for example. Now supply chains need to figure out a way to do that if there's enough value to extract in terms of the tariff arbitrage that is those opportunities could exist.
Hey, you need livestock tags? Get them fast and hassle-free through CCIA's online web store. Shop approved tags for beef cattle and pre-approved tags for goats and cervids. A variety of options all in one place. Order online 24/7. Visit tags.canadaid.ca, your trusted source for traceability. We'll be right back with more of RealAg Radio. Next, it'll be a product spotlight with Genesis, and then back to the issues panel.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated. But did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agrimart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is time for today's Product Spotlight. And joining me now is Jason Mann, who's president of Genesis Fertilizers. How are you doing, Jason?
Doing great. Good morning.
All right. We've got some exciting news to talk about. We'll start with Genesis Fertilizers announced a new partnership with the Arctic Gateway Group. Let's start there before we talk about what it all means. Tell us about this partnership. Who is the Arctic Gateway Group, and when did this all come about?
Right. So it's interesting because Arctic Gateway Group is owned by quite a number of Indigenous communities in northern Manitoba, maybe even into northern Sask. They're owners of the Port of Churchill and the Hudson Bay Railroad, and they've taken ownership maybe a year or two ago. And there's quite a history there with Churchill in that it was a I believe it was a government port, and then it was privatized, and then it transferred hands again. And really the port and the railroad had fallen into disrepair. And the previous owners weren't putting much money into it, and the federal government and provincial governments really couldn't support it because it was a privately owned. So once the Arctic Gateway Group took ownership, it allowed them to access federal and provincial funds, and they've been taking on the task of repairing the railroad, because the railroad was even washed out at one point, and that's really the only ground transportation up to Churchill from the south. So they've taken on repairing that the rail line, which I understand they have decreased their transit times by about 10%, and now they're starting to work on the port. They just got some new funding to work on the port. Why it's important to us, and when we talk about Genesis Fertilizers, well, everybody thinks Genesis Fertilizers is about nitrogen plant, which is what we're building. We want to build nitrogen production in Western Canada for Western Canadian farmers. But when you're using nitrogen, you also need phosphate. And the idea of working with the Arctic Gateway Group is to find a solution to bring phosphate into Western Canada. All of our phosphate is imported. We don't produce any phosphate in Canada, so we're very dependent on imports. And most of those imports come from the USA, or some comes from North Africa. That's primarily where it comes from, USA and North Africa, Morocco in particular. Now, with all this tariff business going on and uncertainties in supply chain, we thought it would be prudent to look for a source of phosphate that we'll call it tariff-free, where we don't have to worry about the risk of tariffs. So if we can source phosphate somewhere globally and then bring it in a Panamax vessel into Churchill, we could avoid that risk. And Churchill can accept a Panamax vessel, so we're trying to keep the cost of freight down by larger vessels. But actually, Churchill into Western Canada is a very efficient route. It's the closest tidewater to prairie farmers, as opposed to Montreal or Vancouver.
Mm-hmm. Now, so let's touch on that a bit more. Transportation costs obviously are a huge component of the price of fertilizer. And input reliability, though, is also a major concern.
Yes.
So how does leveraging the Port of Churchill and the Hudson's Bay Railway, so through the Arctic Gateway Group, how does this help reduce the cost and provide more stable access to fertilizer for prairie farmers specifically?
Right. So we're trying to open up new supply channels. There's not many suppliers in the market of phosphate today. It's a relatively small supply group, so there isn't, I guess there wouldn't be a lot of competition. So if we have the competitiveness of being able to go buy Panamax vessels from a supplier overseas, we should be able to get a better purchase price. We can have a little bit more efficient logistics than using for example, railing phosphate from Florida to Western Canada is pricey because rail is expensive. So if we can get it here on a vessel to Churchill, and then we're really talking about maybe only 1,000 miles of rail to get it into Western Canada. So, and likely at a better rail rate because we're having this partnership with Arctic Gateway Group, we'd be looking at favorable rail rates for a large portion of that trackage from Churchill down to the Pas. So that's about 800 miles of the 1,000 miles or 1,100 miles that I'm referring to.
All right. Thank you, Jason, for joining me here on the show today. And for anyone who's looking for more information, head on over to the Genesis Fertilizers website. You can get in touch with the company there. All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit corteva.ca to learn more.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 for the RealAg Issues Panel. We got Stuart Person from MNP. We got Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture. Hey, the Lemken, Solitaire, and Equalizer seeders and planters offer disruptive innovation like vertical banding, dry or liquid onboard fertilizer, and, of course, great prices. Go to lemkendemo.com for more information and request a demo. That's lemkendemo.com. That equalizer, seeder, and planter, very cool, awesome technology. So please check it out, lemkendemo.com. Okay, let's proceed here. Canadian election, it is still underway. And, Lyndsey, what I have picked up is the Carney camp does see they must have some sort of polling that it's resonating with Canadians, this idea that Canada is the most European of all non-European countries. I heard it out of Foreign Affairs Minister Jolie in an interview with Bloomberg this morning. Carney continues to kind of continue with that rhetoric. I think it's resonating with some Canadians.
I think it is. And if we unpack it a little bit, I mean, there are some things that ring true, right? Our parliamentary system based off, the UK, far more European or UK than our American counterparts. I get where they're trying to align Canada potentially with what they see as better friends than the US. I find it kind of fascinating. And I was listening to a really interesting discussion this week that talked about how, years ago, before Russia invaded Ukraine, Germany had come over to Canada and said, hey, we'd like to buy natural gas potentially from you if we can, and get energy from you because we see this brewing issue. And Prime Minister Trudeau at the time was like, no, we're not going to do that. And so we were pushing the EU away for years. And now suddenly we're embracing them and we are the EU and we should be aligning. Let us all remember. And while it's wonderful, yes, we trade with the EU. We love to travel there, all these sorts of things. Many Canadians, trace their ancestry there. Sure, cool. But we don't have the world's best trade relationship with the EU either, in that it's a very difficult market to actually get into and to meet the specs of what they want. It is not like some slam dunk that we suddenly should be cozying up just to the EU and ignoring our US counterparts. So, are we European-esque? Sure. But I think in the agriculture world, most people would say, and we have many Canadians who came here from Europe to get away from, some of the things about Europe they did not like the excessive regulation and red tape, et cetera. So, there are aspects to this. It seems to be resonating. But again, this is just one of these elections it's unlike any election we've ever had. And the specter of Trump and the US has just completely changed the perspective of this entire election like we've never had.
Yeah,
really.
I kind of wonder if we're the most European, the most European-like is almost like just another way of saying like we're not American. That is the way I kind of look at it. Stuart, what is happening in this election? How would you break it down? I want your fresh take here on what you as you see it.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if I said this on the radio before, but I definitely have been quite concerned about how good the Liberals are at running elections and campaigning, and their numbers are proving that point right now. So even when we were looking at a large Conservative majority projection, 3 months ago or whatever it was, I was kind of saying, hey, don't get too excited. The Liberals are very good at elections, and here we go. So I think from an ag perspective, if you put the ag flair on it, I think Lyndsey's right on that. I don't really think it's in our best interest to be thinking that Europe is the answer to all of our problems, because as she said, they have a lot more restrictions on what they're willing to buy, and we do a lot of things with GMO crops. We do a lot of things with some of our livestock products that they will reject based on their current standards anyway. So we're going to have to, I think your position, Sean, in the piece that you wrote there on Fortress North America, or whatever that piece was called there, Sean, like that's pretty bang on. Like we need to be still thinking that we're going to be trading with the U.S. and Mexico long term. And so I hope we're not trying to use this conversation to be more divisive with the U.S. because I don't know if that's helpful in the situation.
I appreciate that, Stuart. Kelvin, one of the things that you and I have talked about lots is the numbers aren't discussed enough here. Sure, Europe, great place to holiday. Love being there. Been there lots. But they only buy about $35 billion worth of Canadian goods on an annual basis, roughly. The U.S., we export $600 billion. We export $600 billion to the U.S. out of Canada. We're not even in the same ballpark when we talk about this, Kelvin. And I think not enough people understand these numbers.
Yeah, it's nowhere close. China, the EU, some of these other markets, when we talk about finding alternatives to the U.S. market next door, they are nowhere close. And again, I echo what Lyndsey and Stuart both say here in terms of we have 3/4 of our exports, at least from Canada, go to the U.S. And so if we can't necessarily, or we can't. It's not a feasible, realistic scenario to say we're going to replace that with European demand. And when, sure, our CETA Canada-EU trade deal that we signed years ago, there was tons of potential and hype around that deal, and the follow through, the difference between that vision or that plan that politicians expressed versus what's happened in reality, there's just a huge gap there. And so I don't think we can trust the European market as actually fulfilling all this potential. And you look at some of the really key commodities exports that Canada sends outside of our country, they are even more dependent. Energy products, motor, autos, very dependent on the U.S. market. Agriculture, we've actually done a really good job of diversifying trade. We do have over half of our Canadian ag exports and from farm, fish, and intermediate food products last year went to other countries around the world than the U.S., but most of our sectors here in Canada are very reliant on the U.S. And so I think we need to continue to look at diversifying trade from a leverage perspective and in terms of finding those opportunities. If the EU wants to buy something from Canada, if China wants to buy something from Canada, that helps Canada's case in terms of our maintaining our sovereignty in the North American regime. But if push comes to shove and we have to choose whether we want to sell to the EU or China or the US, it's not even a choice. We have to sell to the US. We have to be inside Fortress North America.
And Kelvin, one question I would have on that is if you do diversify away from the U.S. on more products than we already have, I'm assuming shipping costs are going to be higher in getting our products elsewhere. So what does that mean for the return at the farm gate?
Yeah, exactly. You need to get a higher price you need a higher price from the customer overseas than you do from a customer in the U.S. to get the same price at the farm gate.
Yeah, and I think we outlined the 4 buckets. We talked about these 4 buckets on the show last week. People, and there may be other ones, but the feedback I'm getting the most, it's the U.S., it's Europe, it's China, and it's interprovincial trade barriers. And I don't know if we need to talk about interprovincial trade barriers. They're a thing, but that is not one of our solutions. But we can focus on all of them and use the diversification. I think you put it very well, Kelvin. Use diversification as leverage. But the reality is, guys, we are like, there is one of those 4 buckets that is the most important bucket. Whether you like it or you don't, it is the economic reality. But at the same time, people have opinions. And like what audience member said, economics shouldn't matter. And
what?
My head's not there. But
okay,
hey,
wait.
Everybody has an opinion on this. Lyndsey, go ahead.
Well, it's okay. What? In that, I do understand that there are things like principles, choices. I mean, let's face it, as a country, we have chosen to potentially, put sanctions on things for what countries do, et cetera. There are other things, yes, other than economics that matter. But we are talking about, in this whole trade discussion, tariff discussion, it is difficult because realistically, apparently the rules of economics don't matter, but ultimately that's what it all comes down to, because last time I checked, we have to have a job, make money, pay our bills with said money, feelings, principles, etc. Yeah. The bank does not accept as currency.
And if we want a strong social support network as well, if we want public health care, if we want a strong education system, If we want strong infrastructure, it requires government revenue to fund those things if they're publicly funded.
Hey, Kelvin, this week, your thoughts. Did the Conservatives pivot in terms of their election strategy?
I think there was a bit of a pivot from Poilievre, as much of a pivot as we've seen in this campaign so far. In that speech on, believe it was in Toronto on Bay Street audience on Wednesday, was it? So yeah, I do think that we have seen a little bit of a message there to focusing more, putting Trump and the Canada-U.S. relationship as in the focus, whereas they were it almost looked like they were trying to maybe sidestep or ignore it, focus on other things that while Canadians were like, hang on, this is what we're thinking about right now. That's the ballot question, everybody says. So yeah, it does look like there was a bit of a pivot. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. Still seeing some huge numbers at his rallies, but polls, not the Liberal increase in the polls has maybe slowed down now or plateaued, but still no real making up ground there in terms of Conservatives catching up or getting that lead back from the Liberals.
Stuart?
What's super interesting in the polling numbers is that I've been looking at some of the charts that keep coming out on a daily or weekly basis, and the Conservatives really, at least in the last short while, they haven't really lost any support. It's just the Liberals are picking up support from the NDP, the Green Party, and the Bloc Québécois, right? So they have really just picked up support from other parties, and that's been the difference.
Yeah, the NDP.
Yeah, Conservatives are actually, in overall popular support, Conservatives are right where they were or within a percentage point of Harper's majority years ago. So it's just a matter of how strong the NDP are in terms of keeping votes away from the Liberals.
Yeah, and it feels like with what the platform they're running and the way Carney is speaking, he's definitely moved the party more to the center, or maybe, not as far left as the Trudeau team would have had it. And I think that's appealing to a lot more of those voters who sit in that middle zone, right? So I think, I guess we'll see. But
they know how to win elections. Let's put
they
it that
know
way.
how to win elections.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty much sums it up, to be honest with you.
It really does.
Before we take a break here, Canada jobs numbers down, unemployment up, U.S. jobs up. I guess, Stuart, what are you hearing from clients and just the firm in general in terms of the overall economic health here in Canada?
I think there's just a huge amount of uncertainty in the marketplace, and uncertainty makes people put their hands in their pockets and stops the spending of money, stops investment. Businesses are worried, right? And they're gonna batten down the hatches, and they're going to, they're not gonna overspend, or they're not gonna take those chances that they would have otherwise maybe taken until they get some clarity on what's going on. And you can't blame them. I also think we're probably seeing less and less money. I don't have any stats on this. Kelvin probably does, but I'm guessing the amount of capital flowing into Canada is on a steady decline as a result of what's happening as well. So it's not surprising that our jobs numbers are not good. All of what's going on with the tariffs and other issues that we're dealing with is negative. And I just think the market's going to be cautious until they get some clarity.
And not just a Canada thing. To be fair to that, that's the same conversation that's happening in the U.S. Companies saying, whoa, I'm not sure right now is the time to be putting, doing that capital project. I think we're just going to sit tight, wait, hold this out, and kind of see what happens. And, because one of the issues is with all of this, not to talk too much about the tariffs, is the on again, off again. And so people don't know actually what is the longevity to all of this, which is really creating a lot of concern, not only from businesses, but also consumers. And as we talked about, the market has definitely reacted in that fashion. Hey, don't put your yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Envol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizers, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca. We're back with more of RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Hey, don't put your yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizers, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations, imitator brands they just can't match. See the difference at DeventureN.ca. Sean Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture, and Stuart Person coming out of MNP out of Edmonton, Alberta. Okay. Here's if you believe that social media is a real place, where people have been really cooked up this week, maybe the last couple of weeks, is the fact that there needs to be some sort of compensation to canola farmers, specifically for some of the tariff situation with China. Kelvin, am I setting that stage appropriately?
Well, I think I don't think canola farmers in Western Canada want direct payments. Although that is what some farm groups, including groups that represent them, are calling for. I think they would just want the Chinese tariffs to be gone and the Canadian government to deal with it that way, which is a difficult scenario to imagine happening because they're in retaliation for the EV tariffs that Canada has put on jointly with the U.S. And so, yeah, the next best thing, I guess, would be compensation. But again, farmers at the point where, no, we don't want a check in the mail. We want our canola to be worth what it was or what it put. And that's part of this too, is how do we isolate the impact of the tariffs on canola oil and meal to China on our canola price, as now this week we saw futures and local cash prices basically back to where they were before the tariffs took effect. The question is, though, maybe they'd be $1.50 higher per bushel if we didn't have these tariffs onto China. Who knows? That's the thing we can't really assess right now.
Well, and the fact, hey, well, I'm going to get Stuart's thoughts. Stuart, what is your thought here? Does there need to be compensation?
I think there does. The problem is once again, first of all, I want to applaud Cody Beloy for his announcement on agri-stability enhancements. That's excellent. Those are all the things they're enhancing are things that would have been on our list of things that we would like to see done to the program. So that's great. We'll take it. Thank you. Assuming it goes through. But on the flip side, if they're thinking that is what's going to save the day on these tariffs, it's not really true. If we just take canola, for example, and say that the impact is $1 or $2 a bushel impact on price, and like Kelvin said, we don't know, and we may never know. It's really hard to know exactly what's happening unless you can see it through a basis that the grain companies are applying, a negative basis. Maybe you can see it through there. I'm not sure, but it's taken the profit off the table for us as canola producers. So I'm speaking as a farmer now. Like if we're growing canola and you take $2 a bushel away on the price, you basically took away all of the profit and maybe put us into a loss in that situation. And agri-stability is not designed to deal with that. Agri-stability is designed to deal with when we're in a loss already, and then the loss gets deeper, let's say. So there will likely be no agri-stability compensation for the tariffs unless the tariffs impact the price more severely than we're already seeing. And the price has recovered. We've seen it recover, but like Kelvin said, well, maybe it would have went higher. We don't even know what the overall impact is at this point. But we won't see any agri-stability money specific to that $1 or $2 a bushel loss, if that's what it is. And I think this is completely outside of the control of any of the farmers. And I think, if it's a political move that Ottawa is doing, saying, hey, we're going to put tariffs on EVs, and the retaliation happens to be canola getting caught in the crosshairs of that. I mean, I think it's something that was driven politically, and I think the farmers are entitled to be looking for some compensation for this.
The other thing we don't know, did China need to buy any meal or oil during this period?
Fair.
Maybe they wanted seed at a discount.
Maybe they wanted to support their domestic crushers. Maybe I look now, because of all these tariffs, if we're going to go down this road, because of all these tariffs, I looked at my investment account. It's down. That's the doing of all this tariff talk. I want my investment account backfilled. I've got retirement concerns, and who knows, the market may have been up. I'm a little bit concerned here, Lyndsey.
Sure, but again, there's a lot to unpack there. It's almost like economics matter. Further to our conversation, but I will say that I am someone who a couple weeks ago changed my investment strategy, and I took some risk off the table. So ultimately, in commodity markets, there are tools to manage some risk. I'm not saying that this is risk that we have necessarily, had to manage before, this level of volatility and this whatever. But at the same time, I struggle with this in two ways. For one, yes, the Chinese tariff is likely tied to the EV tariffs, which means that's a government impact because of a government policy. But again, maybe they just wanted to drive the price down so they could make some purchases for their own means, whatever. But the flip side of this is also, as we've mentioned, if we take things away to make China happy, we tick off the Americans, which I know they're not exactly besties right now with us, but at the same time, we just outlined why keeping the US as happy as we can actually still does matter. And then there's the flip side of, like, as individual producers, price risk is a real thing that we have to manage every year. Yes, these are incredible economic forces that we're trying to manage, but we do have at least some tools at our disposal to potentially manage some of that risk. And ultimately, I can want the market to be lots of things, but the market is the market, and I still have to be in that reality. I still have to deal with what the prices are. So I sell lamb. Sure, it's great right now. I don't have any way to trade. I don't have any way to put a downward price floor on that. I don't have an actual functioning exchange to do any sort of risk management on my lamb prices, right? So the long and the short of it is really unfortunate that especially our canola growers, but our agriculture industries end up getting caught up in so much of this. But ultimately, that is the reality that we are in. And frankly, if I were advising anybody, I'd be saying, if you don't know all of your risk management tools available to you, now's the time to start studying up and figuring out how to do this, because, and not to say you don't take the pressure off that you want the government to make the best decisions for you, absolutely, but we also have to function in the everyday of our own accord and run our own businesses, and we need to be using the risk management tools out there.
Kelvin, she's sandbagging the whole lamb thing again. Like it's okay. I have other sources that are telling me that it's much better than as she is outlining it. Hey, I have a text here from Grant. Okay, and I think this is a common question amongst the audience. Question, and maybe it would be an unpopular opinion in Canada. In the U.S., farmers will receive direct payments, bailouts due to tariffs, yet even though our markets are dependent on Chicago prices, we don't receive anything from the Canadian government. Of course, I'd rather have great markets for all, but I have a lot of debt and sure would like some help. In brackets, I understand that I'm the one that put myself in debt. Just a question as to why our government doesn't seem to care as much about its farmers. So I think that's a common question. So who wants to take that one? Stuart, you're going to jump on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably many answers to that. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to food security, we are a huge exporting nation, so maybe our food security argument isn't as exciting as it might have been if we consumed all of the food we grew in Canada. We also, maybe the farmers don't, as far as voting power, do we have that much voting power? I don't know. We typically don't vote for the party that's in power right now, so that's probably not helpful either. To be honest, we've spent a lot of time in Canada being worried about WTO rules when it comes to government subsidy payments. And I know what the question you were just asking. I think if you did pay some of these payments, and what I was suggesting, if you did compensate canola growers for the loss there, you got to be careful how you do it, because if you do it as a direct subsidy, then we get into all sorts of trouble there. And I realize that the Americans seem to do whatever they want. But as we know, that tends to be a one-way street. But if we start doing it, then all of a sudden we've got WTO issues to deal with as well, which could make things even worse. So I think I think he's right. I think there should be more emphasis put on this. I like the idea of utilizing all the existing programs like Lyndsey was saying, but there's ways you could actually use the agri-stability program to enhance certain payments. I mean, they have all the data. For all us producers who are in agri-stability, they have all sorts of data that can show them the impact of these tariffs would have on a farm. And they could use that program to help estimate, well, what was the impact and what should we top these folks up through a program that maybe is viewed as a lot more WTO compliant. So those would just be things to factor in when we're asking for funding. The other thing we haven't talked about is we talked a bunch about canola, but this is also impacting pork and pulses, right? And
aquaculture too.
And aquaculture. And I've heard some people in the pork industry, they're in not good shape over this either, right? So we shouldn't forget about them.
Yeah. Kelvin, what's your thoughts on this support?
Well, one comment on the WTO compliance. China is challenging Canada's EV tariffs at the WTO. So if that's a concern that's holding the Canadian government back, it's not on protecting the auto industry or the potential EV industry in Canada. I do think it goes back to what the main answer, I think, goes back to what Stuart said about votes and the U.S. electoral college system, and just the overall U.S. political system gives agriculture, the Midwest, much more clout. The way their primary system works in the parties, all of that. In Canada, the way that rural farming parts of the country vote doesn't often determine elections, and so elections in Canada are determined in Toronto and in Montreal and in Vancouver, and so those are the places where politicians and policies get based on.
Yeah, that was my answer back.
That's why we're not hearing about this canola issue as much as what people want to hear about during this election campaign.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, Kelvin, and I think you can look at it two ways. Like, on the one hand, I think I'm disappointed, that there's been so much focus on the auto sector and the government. But on the other hand, I think the government's done a great job trying to protect that, and they're working hard to make sure that they do what they can for that sector. I just think for agriculture, we'd like to see them do the same for us, right? And potash, we'd like to see them do that for them as well. They've got a 10% tariff on potash going south of the border. Like, there's all this focus on auto, but nobody seems to really care about the other groups that are impacted.
Yeah, but again, back to the numbers, Kelvin, you know them off the top of your head. It's the size of that auto sector that is overwhelming.
Yeah. The auto sector is huge, but it doesn't mean that you can't do both. That's right. Like. Yeah. They should be able to stand up for both industries, not have to pick one over the other, and that's certainly the impression that a lot in Western Canada are getting. Yeah, the scope of the steel and aluminum and auto exports to the U.S. are enormous compared to canola to China, or these canola products to China. But yeah, why can't you do both?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, good news, bad news. Bad news is we're done here on Rural Radio 147, but the good news is those of you listening to the RealAg Radio podcast are going to get one more segment where we cover the things that we did not talk about here on the show. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio episode, brought to you by hard-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, extended control. It also has activity on lygus and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/CA today.
And it's time for some bonus time here on RealAg Radio. Kelvin, you know what I didn't tell you on the show? That 3 nights ago, I had a dream. I had a dream.
Oh.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep this as clean as possible.
This is the after show where Sean shares his dream.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I was playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we won the Stanley Cup. I think it's a premonition. I think the Leafs may win the cup.
Is that a dream?
There's a bunch of things lining up here.
There's
a bunch of things lining up here. You know, the last year that the Detroit Red Wings and Boston Bruins did not make the NHL playoffs?
Toronto
1967.
Oh, baby. Oh, baby.
The lining up. And Lyndsey was talking about risk management during that last session. It made me think maybe I should take some money off of some investments and put it into the Leafs winning against Ottawa in the first round, hey?
Yeah, start a FanDuel account and just rip it. Just go, man.
No.
Yeah.
Or
lower risk than the stock. It'd be lower risk than the stock market.
Okay, well, that's maybe true.
Man, if you were short Apple this week, ooh, baby, you have made a fortune, sister.
It could be a good buying opportunity too.
So I was listening because I listen to too many things. Apple is the most susceptible to all the China trade war. If you're looking to one of those blue chips in that space, Microsoft is the least susceptible to the China tariffs. So there's this isn't a place for stock tips, everybody. I'm just telling you what I've heard.
This bonus segment is just
remember, like Jim Cramer, buy. Okay. Lyndsey, what did we not talk about that you wanted to cover today on the show?
Well, actually, thank you for asking, Sean, and I have been biting my tongue and biding my time for this. This week...
whoa, hold on. Did you feel that you didn't get enough airtime on the show today?
Oh, no, I just am going to surprise everybody with this, and I didn't give any inkling that I wanted to talk about it. So no, it's fine. And not it's fine. It is actually fine. Because, this week on the Truth About Ag podcast, you may know the guest. His name is Sean Haney. He's here on this show right now. And, great chat with Evan Shout. Really enjoyed it. I never get tired of hearing the RealAg story. But there was one particular part that I feel I really need to draw attention to. And that was Sean shared the story of the two of us wrapping up the outdoor farm show, standing in a soybean seed tote and being absolutely ridiculous. And Sean, you said something that it hurt me to my core.
Uh-oh.
You said you probably wouldn't do that now. I am hurt and upset that at our age and at this point in our careers, that is something you've taken off the table. Because I, for one, would totally do a wrap-up in a soybean seed tote still.
We weren't just in a soybean seed tote. I had Penelope the cow.
Yes, the cow head.
The mascot head on my head. And I was talking to you doing the discussion with the mascot head. Yeah.
It was ridiculous. Yeah, in the pouring rain. And I remember because I had my feet like wedged to try and stay up in said seed tote and not slide off and slip into it was ridiculous. But anyway, you said in the Truth About Ag podcast, you said you were going to do it now.
I also had to apologize to Lyndsey last night.
You really didn't.
I've been very fortunate to be able to be on a number of different podcasts, Farm for Profit on this week as well, along with Truth About Ag, and I really appreciate other podcasts having an interest in the RealAg story. But I go through these moments of regret and I do this on stage too, where I say things and I'm like, I don't know if I should have said that. And to an audience, it's one thing because it's not being taped, not being broadcast.
That's right.
But on a podcast, it kind of lives. And then all these podcasts do these reels and these shorts and it lives in infamy. Right?
Yeah.
And I said that on the Truth About Ag, I referred to Lyndsey as my work wife. And I had this moment where I was like, it's 2025. Am I supposed to do that? Was that bad? And so I was like, hey, just wanted to let you know. I know you listened to it. Are we still cool? He said,
it's fine. I didn't call HR. We're good. So, yeah, it's fine. I still think you can say that. It's fine. Anyway. Yeah, I think so too. I laughed.
It was from a point of love.
Yeah, really that's right. Exactly. Intention matters. But anyway, we're not, So that was my note.
I appreciate that. Well, I will reconsider in my evaluation of what I'm willing to do versus not do.
Okay, thank you.
I feel like now you're going to put me to a test in the future now. Sean do this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sort of like I'd be treated like, remember on Super Dave? Mr.
Super
What was
Dave.
his name?
Super Dave Osborne.
The Japanese guy,
God.
the stunt coordinator.
Oh,
Mr. Fuji?
yeah.
No, Mr. Suzuki?
Yeah.
No.
Was it Mr. Fuji?
What was his
this
name?
part we'll have to just kind of.
Yeah.
'cause-
Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, Stuart, what did we not talk about today that you thought you wanted to cover?
I don't know. I thought we covered a lot of ground. You did mention the seed issue, which you had a segment on this week on Wednesday, I think it was, on the show.
Yeah.
I listened to that segment yesterday as I was commuting, and I was actually I should be more invested in this discussion than I am currently. So it was good for me to hear a bit of the concern that's out there in terms of lack of interest, I think, from the private sector in doing this. And I think we need to probably, all farmers need to take note of this and start figuring out what the right answer is here.
Yeah. So just to give you up to speed, it was earlier this week. Talked to Tyler McCann from Cappy and Lauren Cummin from Seeds Canada, and they wrote a column that we posted at RealAgriculture.com talking about using the VUA, which is essentially like a royalty not only on certified seed but on the farm safe seed portion throughout the years. You're using that technology, and so the theory was this is a way to fund public plant breeding more adequately into the future, privately and publicly. And loaded with controversy. Listen, I grew up in the seed industry. I know this is one where everybody's not on the same team. There's a lot of debate to go on. But I thought it was a really interesting discussion. I know, Lyndsey, you listened to that. What do you think?
Yeah. So, and it is one of those ones that I think, I understand why it is such it isn't like, it's very contentious, and everybody's got an idea, and there's definitely, so many that are like, yes, I value varietal development, then it's like, but then royalties, et cetera. And it is interesting for me to, well, first, I'm thankful that we are bringing this front and center. And Stuart, to your point, I do think that this entire conversation probably has sort of dropped down the list of things that get talked about. And we do need to talk about it because ultimately we need a reason to develop new and exciting varieties for our Canadian farmers. We have great acres of certain crops and not so we're a blip for some other ones, and we are dependent on varieties or hybrids getting developed for others that we would then bring in. So we have to value that system in some way, and that means that there has to actually be some way to reinvest in bringing varieties to market. So I highly recommend everybody. There's, as you said, Sean, there's the op-ed, and then the conversation that you had with Tyler and Lauren is also clipped and put into there. So head on over and everybody give it a listen. I understand that it's a contentious issue. Farmers at times feel like, they're nickeled and dimed over all these things, but ultimately we have to have sustainable means to reinvest in varietal development. And so, the status quo is not working.
One of the curious things, there seems to be, some of the feedback I got this week is that there's some farmers out there that believe if the Conservatives do form the next government, that they are going to give public plant breeding the funding that it requires going forward. That kind of surprised me that was out there, because I could make the same argument that some of the cost cutting that could happen, we could see a defunding of public plant breeding under a Conservative government. So just interesting to hear all the different perspectives. So if you missed that, go check it out and send us some emails on your thoughts. Kelvin, what did we not cover?
Oh man, we did run the gamut here. I guess there was, and this ties in with this discussion about the future of plant breeding in Canada and public funding for it. Some of the election campaign stuff, the announcements this week that we heard, and that's one thing. We haven't heard the parties, the Conservatives or the Liberals, say what they would do with public plant breeding. It's kind of been a erosion effect here under the Liberal government the last 9 years when it comes to public funding for it, and that's kind of why this is coming to a head right now. I think if the Conservatives come, like you said, Sean, sure they have the farmer base voting for them. They might have MPs that understand the issue here, but at the same time, Conservatives are also likely to rein in the federal deficit and make cuts to Agriculture Canada. Meanwhile, the Liberals might continue with the same path of letting it erode further. There's been no commitments made there. One thing, I guess, with having Stuart on the panel, there's a couple things that were announced this week on the tax or accounting side of things, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Stuart, but we saw Poilievre talk about capital gains on investments, or having exemptions for capital gains on investments in Canada. We've seen some other different policies when it comes to tax and the way businesses would make their decisions based on which party comes to power here. Any thoughts on anything there that you're looking forward for in terms of commitments from these parties? I know some of the farm groups are calling for 100% capital cost allowance, bringing that measure back as part of helping the economy here through these tough times. Any thoughts, Stuart, on some of that accounting kind of stuff in the election campaign?
Well, first and foremost, if they are going to make changes, I want them to make the changes and pass the legislation before they make the change.
Oh, amen, brother, amen.
We've been living in, I think I can speak for all accountants that we've been living in a nightmare for the last 2 years of not knowing what the rules actually are. And in for certain rules, we still don't have clarity. But hey, all of those types of suggestions that you mentioned there, Kelvin, are, I think they'd be helpful. One thing that it does add is it adds some complexity to the Tax Act, because if it's, you only get the capital gains treatment on Canadian investments, so then there's a component of determining what's a Canadian investment versus a non-Canadian, and so it won't be without its challenges. But I get what they're trying to do there. The CCA thing is great. It's just, I just caution people on that one, because when you do take these lump sum CCA deductions up front, then you've kind of, deducted your tractor or your combine or your new baler or whatever all immediately. You have no deductions coming forward. So quite often it creates a bit of an issue down the road where you all of a sudden become much more taxable. So those things are great in the short term, but they don't necessarily benefit as much in the long term. And to be fair, in the farming industry, we have a lot of ways to manage our income. Most farmers are taxed on the cash basis, and so we can do various things to kind of smooth that income out from year to year, so we don't get caught with big peaks and valleys in our taxable income. And so I'm not sure if you need the CCA deduction to still accomplish that. I guess you probably would for some industries, or for some sectors, maybe more so than others. But again, it's you get the deduction now, but you just have to be prepared for the fact that the tax will be coming down the road, and you're just kicking the can. You're not actually. It's not a tax savings. It's just a deferral. Is, I guess, the key message I want to say there.
Whether it's the Liberals or the Conservatives, what would we like to hear in their promises for ag? Like what would be things that, whether it comes from either party, that aren't necessarily being brought up, that, or maybe they need to have more of an emphasis. They are being brought up, but they're just kind of quiet. What needs to be more out in the ether?
Oh, if I can jump in, we did see the Liberals kind of unveil their ag campaign, or their ag platform, this week. Francois Philippe Champagne. Apparently, Mark Carney was supposed to make the announcement at a dairy farm in Quebec, and they ended up having that Canada-U.S. Cabinet Committee meet instead. So Finance Minister Francois Philippe Champagne made this announcement, and he talked about protecting supply management through trade talks. He talked about the enhancements to agri-stability that Minister Blois and Stuart talked about earlier. There was $30 million for agri-marketing and enhancements or an increase to the agri-marketing program. To me, that's something in this environment we should be investing heavily in market development, promotion, that type of thing. Also in infrastructure. Some of the numbers I've seen from the federal parties in this election campaign don't seem to really move the needle if we're talking about improving our infrastructure in terms of getting stuff to overseas markets and reducing that reliance on the U.S. again. I know those are both general, but there's a long list of things that I think we would like to hear. Parties are reluctant to share a lot of detail right now.
But why, though? Why be reluctant?
It's a lot easier to keep your promises if you don't share details.
Right. I think from the tax side, one thing that would be nice to see the governments put a little more effort into. And they did this with Bill C-208. So you got to give them credit where credit is due. C-208 was very helpful with succession planning, but there's one step further that could go with that. And what we're seeing out there in the market is that a lot of farms, when you go through the different generations, you could have we'll call the older generation in their 70s, 80s, 90s right now, and you've got that middle generation in there in their 50s, 60s. A lot of the 50, 60-year-olds, maybe even into the 70-year-olds, are brothers and sisters that were farming together. And as these farms transition, there's typically quite often only one person taking over that farm. And so you end up in a situation where you've got uncles and aunts trying to transition a family farm that started with grandpa, let's say, and now it's got to come back to one child of one of the siblings. And you end up in a situation where you can't move that equity on a deferred tax basis from an uncle to a nephew, or an aunt to a nephew, or to a niece for that matter. So C-208 helped with that in terms of giving access to the capital gain exemption on sale, but these farms are worth a lot of money. And in the situation where you have an uncle that needs to trigger the tax on trying to move his share of the farm to his niece or nephew who's taking over, it puts that farm in a bad spot if that tax has to be paid. And so just something that I think they could take a harder look at in terms of if they really want to tackle transition and succession in farming, that tax deferral is important to maintain. And it always, I always look through and saying, well, if this successor is a grandchild of the grandparent who started the farm, or the great grandparent who started the farm, like really we do have lineal succession happening. It's just that it went over to an uncle or an aunt who happens to be, not directly lineal with the individual. And I think they could do the industry a huge favor by tweaking the act, or putting an exception in there to keep farms, just like if it was your father or your mother transitioning, if your uncle or aunt could do the same, it's quite often the same family farm that we're talking about.
That's a good point. Lyndsey, anything from you?
No, I'm good. We already talked about the Truth About Ag.
No. Like
this week,
platform. On the platform.
Oh, on the platform. I'm a little bit like, we've got a couple weeks left, and I know that, or I anticipate that the Conservatives have, it does seem to be that they have something to, announce every little while, and it seems to be very well planned out. So maybe we'll see if there's some cool stuff coming. I'm not going to get my hopes up that agriculture features prominently in any federal election, because I think every time we have one, we try really hard to be like, hey, we matter too. Realistically, I think with all the tariff and Trump stuff, agriculture is in a lot of ways more part of this election than perhaps past ones have been. At the same time, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that in this moment, people have a lot of headspace for something like that, when affordability, dealing with trade, or U.S. and Trump, it's just front and center. And I'm not sure that we're going to get any actual airtime.
To me, this could be positive for Canadian, like in terms of our politics refocusing and reprioritizing trade and cutting red tape. Both of those are things that Canadian agriculture really impacts outcomes in Canadian agriculture.
Here it lacks momentum. I'm worried, like we're elbows up, everybody, but we're like we gotta, like, let's go. That's my fear, is that we've talked about it, which we're great at. But it's the make it happen part that that's what we got to show, because that's kind of the antithesis of what Canada typically does, right? We got to do the action part. Action, everybody. So this has been a lot of fun. Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. And Stuart, look forward to the Leafs and Oilers in the final in July.
Stay tuned.
Well, I've already dreamt what happened, so. The part about me playing defense, that was a little bit, that I think that was kind of out the sphere of reality.
That's the out there part?
No, that was the sort of fake part. But the Leafs winning the cup, I think I woke up in the morning, I was like, Kelvin, I couldn't believe I didn't tell you. It took like 4 days. Lyndsey, have yourself a great weekend.
Yes, you as well.
And Stuart, you know what? We'll definitely have you back.
Okay.
I appreciate the insight into the Stuart Person from MNP out of the city of past champions. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, and have yourselves a great weekend.